Welcome to A State of Mind, the podcast that brings together consciousness, meditation, mindfulness, psychology, psychedelics, and so much more in pursuit of this mystery we call life. This is Julian Royce. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today's episode was a really good one. I get to speak with two musicians. I think they're more than musicians. I would also call them spiritual teachers, Ena Vie and Howard Lipp. And they founded something called the Keala Rafana ministry. So the fact that they founded a ministry together tells you that their intentions are, something a little deeper. And they shared a copy of their new musical album with me called Soma Ceremonia. And just to give you a sense of who they are and the kind of music that they're creating, I'm going to play for you a song called Corazon. So as you can hear from that, their music is very atmospheric, very evocative, and in fact this entire album, as we discussed in the podcast, was created with the intention for being ceremonial music. And it really does take you on a journey. They are really lovely people. I love how they talk about discovering your authentic self and living from that place. We discuss things like how plant spirit medicine can be an anti-addiction medicine, as well as some of the limitations of the traditional AA model for working with addictions. And we talk about the importance of community. They created their own community, I believe, in California. And they did a beautiful job of answering this question about how you can make decisions in your life about what to do. The fact that this is a challenging question for so many of us today is illustrated by the fact that we have a whole industry that's sprung up called life coaching. So I really appreciated their answer there. And I really appreciated when they spoke about how we are addicted to our thinking. And I think that's so true. And one of my teachers, is a Buddhist teacher, meditation teacher, talked about it very kind of matter-of-factly. He's like, let's just let's think about our thinking for a moment. We tend to be caught up in this thinking process that's kind of narrating our life, or having these thoughts in our head that are repetitive, they're often self-centered, and more often than not, they're negative. And so I think a big part of what's often called spirituality or meditation is learning how to go beyond that. Like, we don't have to spend our whole life caught up in these thoughts, which actually prevent us from fully experiencing the life that is unfolding before our very eyes. So, without further ado, I bring you Ena and Howard.
I'm here today with Ena and Howard. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for inviting us, Julian. We're happy to be here.
Yep, thanks for having us, Julian. Yeah. It's great to speak with you today.
Yes, it's my pleasure. And you started something called the Keala Rafana Ministry, right?
Yes.
You guys want to say that? I'm probably mispronouncing it.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, Keala Rafana.
Keala. And you were kind enough to share with me your new musical album, which is great. So I've been listening to it, and it's very atmospheric, evocative, ceremonial music, and it's specifically intended for ceremony, right? Is that correct?
It is. It's intended for a ceremonial experience. It's been crafted as a sound journey from beginning to end, based on the arc of traditional medicine or sound healing journeys.
Yeah, and also we created it so that if you wanted to have a personal spiritual journey or a meditation, if you will, you could create a sacred space for yourself, lay out a yoga mat or light some incense or a candle and set an intention and push play and lay down for an hour and go on an internal journey from start to finish. It kind of takes you, as Howard was saying, on this arc of a process that enlivens. There's some shamanic drumming. There's some singing and guidance that takes you on the internal journey, and then it kind of brings you out into this quiet, gentle space of reception when you're completed.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's great to have a whole album with that intention. I've been working on creating some playlists to do something similar, like to help people have a meditative experience with music. But it's and I have friends who've created playlists like that, but it's a little challenging, to like get the whole flow. So it's a real art to do that.
Yeah, and I have to say it's probably old school because people don't really make albums anymore, or if they do, they release them by singles and then maybe make a compilation. But we just felt really compelled, and this is an album that's been 13 years in the making. Because these are songs that we've been singing longer than that. Some of them were written brand new for this album, but many of them are traditional songs that have been sung in different ceremonial contexts and rituals, and they've held deep meaning for us. So for us to share them in this album is significant and deeply personal and meaningful. We've sung them in many ceremonies, many environments of healing and intention and transformation. So they are our personal offering, if you will, and also a transmission of passing on these traditional songs and of ancient prayers that have been sung and prayed for probably thousands of years. So,
that's beautiful. Yeah, I was just talking with a friend the other day about how the album is kind of a lost thing and how it's a shame, and how musicians used to put a lot of effort into creating a whole piece of music. And I think we don't have to go down this rabbit hole too much, but I think when Apple created the little players and they had the shuffle function, it kind of started to destroy that. I mean, maybe it was already going to happen, and then all of our collective attention spans have been so shortened that we can't even imagine listening to a piece of music for 60 minutes.
This is true. Yeah.
Well, back in the day, we used to create a playlist by stacking 45s on the spindle, and they'd play one after the other.
Oh, well.
but also, the 70s saw album-oriented rock with a purpose to the record. There was a theme,
right,
and the music was created in such a way that it took you on a flow. Bands like Yes and Styx and Genesis, they all had
Pink Floyd.
A concept.
Yeah,
they were concept albums. Of course, Pink Floyd was the master of the concept album.
Yeah, I love that stuff. So some of these songs, you're not exactly an original composition. They're traditional music. Do you want to speak to that? Like, what kind of tradition?
Well, some of the songs are sung in Aramaic that were traditional melodies that we brought our own take on, or we added to the melodic structure or flow. Some of the songs are traditional native prayers. One is a song, a Makchi. It's sung in Saponi language. So it's not a language that's spoken anymore. That song was written by Purify, and it was featured actually on a Robbie Robertson album that he did for a movie with Martin Scorsese about some of the different tribes in North America. But also there are a number of songs. It's about half, actually. I think half of the songs are traditional songs that we have been singing for years, and half of the songs are songs that we wrote. And so one of the songs, for example, Djembe Ceremony, which I love this story. Howard, maybe you can start off with telling about how the song was written, and then...
Well, it started out with just shamanic drumming, which is part of the ceremonial experience. And after I finished the drumming, we sat in the studio and listened to it and thought, well, maybe it needs a little shaker, a little rattle, a little shakapa. And we did that. And I contacted a friend of mine who's a master sound healer and absolute brilliant didgeridoo player, and I asked him if he could do something for it. And he did, and he sent it to me, and we laid that in. And once we heard that, the idea came, maybe she should sing on it.
Yeah, we were listening to the song in the studio, and it sounded so good, and we didn't almost want to touch it because we thought, oh, this is such a great journey song with a drum. You can lay down and just go on this internal journey. But then
But the truth is, every layer we added made the song better. So when ideas like this come, I'm always one to entertain them, because as a producer, every idea is a good idea until it doesn't work out.
Right. So he said, okay, Ena, just go in the vocal booth and see what happens. So I went in. We hadn't had anything in mind. We just push play and record, and this vocal track came out. And then I came back in the studio and we listened to it, and yeah, that sounds good. He's like, go back in and do another pass. Okay, so we did a second pass, and what you hear on the album is first time it was ever sung. We didn't change any of it. And we just went from there. So that was a really exciting moment, because a lot of this album was not in our heads on how to produce it or create it. We were really following the spirit of both the sound of the plants that were inspirational, of the traditions that we were honoring and singing their songs, of the ceremonial container in which we've worked hundreds and hundreds of hours and thousands of hours and hundreds of ceremonies. And so together, this was really a heart offering for us it's our first album singing together. We've done a number of albums before, but we really just were excited to create this. And we finished it during COVID, which was also a huge excitement for us. It was an opportunity for us to receive all the medicine of the music that we were creating. It was buoying us during COVID, because this last year for everybody has been pretty intense. And also it was a long time project that we had been wanting to finish, and we finally had the time in lockdown to complete it. So it was a really beautiful project for us to complete. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I'll talk more about it in the intro that I'll create, but this is our second pass at doing this, because I had COVID 2 weeks ago, so I appreciate you guys coming back on when I'm feeling better. I think that the whole pandemic and this idea of healing and all the different levels of healing, it's really, I think sometimes that word is used more, psychologically or spiritually or physically, and they're all related, I think, and they all go together. And I think that it's just the whole pandemic has really brought this home, how precious our lives are, how delicate we are, how interrelated all these different parts of our being are. And I think music is so powerful. A lot of, I've been to things like sound healings or guided meditation kind of spaces, and a lot of times people will say afterwards, like, the music was the most powerful part, to just let themselves really feel that. So I appreciate that you guys made use of this time to create something beautiful like this.
Well, thank you. The beauty of music is that it brings us very present. It was my sanity drug as a kid was playing music. Music called to me. I learned how to play, and it was that kept me sane. in the midst of a very stressful childhood, very stressful. So I would disappear into making music.
You've been a musician your whole life, pretty much.
Yeah, since I was 11.
Do you want to share about that? Yeah. What did you start playing?
I started playing the keyboard at first and the bass guitar. Before that, I actually sang with a band for a short time, but being 11 in New Jersey is not a great way to front a band of 18 and 19-year-olds because you can't go to a club and perform. And when I was a little older, they did have a fake beard made for me and passed me off as old enough to be in clubs. Yeah, it worked.
Interesting.
It worked. They would bring me in like 20 minutes before we'd start, so the lights would all be dim, and then they'd hustle me out of there at the end, and got away with it for a couple of years, until I was old enough to actually perform. Yeah. But it was my joy, and it was my sanity, to be able to make sound and immerse myself in it, and listen to music by all the masters who I wanted to know. Keith Emerson, Rick Wakeman, Jordan Rudess, all these magnificent players. So I spent a lot of time just ripping off everything that they did, because that's generally what self-taught musicians do. We plagiarize until we sort of organize our own style. And that's what I did. It's just like most people who are learning, is I played everything by people who I really loved and appreciated and adored. And eventually, a style came out of it that had influences of all my favorite influencers, but was uniquely me. Because my influences are very varied. It's not just keyboard players. Jimi Hendrix is an influence. Frank Zappa. I mean, there are so many different musicians. Louis Armstrong. There are different melodic and rhythmic ways of doing things. So it was a broad spectrum. My parents were into Judy Garland and big bands, so there was a lot of Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, Ella Fitzgerald, all of that in my background too. So it was interesting what it's all coalesced into musically, which is not exactly rock and roll, and it's not exactly new age, but it's the hard part is, where do you actually place it?
Yeah, we're not sure. It's a fusion of the planet.
Yeah. I don't know what to call it either, but the word evocative feels like it fits for me. It's like something you're feeling in your body, and there's an emotional resonance and that journey component.
So I think that describes it very well, Julian, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah, it's good to hear you say that, because that actually is what our intention is. So I feel like when I hear you say that, we did what we set out to do.
It's kind of a moment where I tap myself on the shoulder and go, I think we got what we intended. Because we, you know, in singing these songs and in learning them, and also in a way receiving them, as I like to say, receiving them, because they feel like they're gifts, the ones that we've written, that we're following and listening to something deeper than, say, what our mind or what my mind is crafting, or what I think I should be crafting or singing. And so I can get really caught up here. And when I kind of put that aside and take a few breaths and step back and allow for presence, for the present moment to be the guide, for the breath to be the guide, for the body to be the portal, if you will, the opener to deeper creativity within, then I'm also listening to what's needed on a larger scale than what I want. Not to say that I can't be involved in the creative process. I am. But often, when I open myself up to something much larger than what I could create in my mind only, then I'm opening to what perhaps a larger community is wanting or a collective is needing, and that feels really good, because now I'm communicating in a different way, and so it can meet people in a different way.
Right. Like not coming from thinking about it as much as letting something bigger move through you.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, we're certainly involved in it. We love every aspect of making music, and in speaking particular about this album, from start to finish, we're so proud of it in the sense of there's not one aspect of any song where we're not like, no, yet we just feel like every part of who we are, was present, was part of it, was listening. These songs are super special to us in that way, but also we were ready to offer them to more people to have the opportunity to listen to them and experience them on their own. Our preference is in a ceremonial, intentional way. But, once you put it out there, then you have to let it go of how it's going to be heard or in the context or container. But that's our intention, is to have it be in an intentional, ceremonial journey, personal journey, or group journey type environment.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's a great intention, and it's needed. Do you want to share a little bit about you said music was your sanity. Like, do you want to share about your journey with that and how you came to found the ministry and what that means?
Well, as a child, it was a very stressful experience growing up. I went to a private school. I was bullied a lot at home. And my safe haven was going into the room where our gear was set up so I could just make music, because that was kind of my sanctuary. It was like my cave where nobody bothered me. He's in there making music. We just let him be. And that was helpful. And over the course of years, of course, I played in a lot of different bands, different styles of music. But I really didn't connect with music and its power to heal or transform or change your state of mind consciously and intentionally. I used to listen to music that sort of amplified the state I was in. If I was angry, I'd listen to something really rageful. If I was feeling melancholy, I would listen to something that was rather melancholy. But my first experience with plant medicine, which came when I got sober, because it eventually led me to addiction. My own pain and suffering just continued to amplify with my addiction to my thinking and my family's way of being in the world and seeing the world, which wasn't necessarily the healthiest. And from what I gather, not too many families have that.
Yeah.
And you know this very well in what you do as well.
You're not alone.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of what we found and why we founded the ministry. But, I went to a treatment center in 88. And at that time, I learned about meditation and martial arts. And that took me on this inner journey. But it was later when I went to treatment a second time that I was introduced to plant medicine and really learned about sound as a vehicle for transforming your state of mind, for bringing you present. That rather than using a piece of music to amplify where I was at, unless, of course, I was in a joyful place, that there's music I could use to bring me present to what was going on, to bring me into this moment. And the beauty of that was I learned it at the treatment center that I went to. They had a practitioner who was an Ayurvedist. And on the underground aspect, he would do rituals with Soma, which is a plant medicine from India. And it was during those journeys that I learned so much more about sound and its influence on the body, because there was so much about the sound that he used that helped free the suffering.
So was this like a residential addiction treatment center, like where people would go and live? And
yes, it was.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's such a fascinating story. So, like, as listeners of the podcast know, I just had Mike Crowley on the podcast. He's a Buddhist scholar, and he has this whole book talking about, in part, about Soma, in the Vedas. It was this mysterious, what's the right word for it? Beverage or potion or elixir. Elixir would be a good word, yeah. But it's been debated for decades now, like, what it really was, and no one really knows. But it sounds like you met someone who did underground work that was very helpful for you, and they called what they had Soma. Do you have any idea what it was?
Well, he was from India, and he got the tea from India. I can honestly say that he wasn't sure, because he wasn't getting it, and it was a secret formula. But from my research, it seems to me that it has a high likelihood of being Amanita muscaria. Because doing some research, these rituals were done laying down on a mat, blindfolded, motionless, to allow the energy of the plants to move through your meridians, or they call them nadis, to help move stuck energy. And you would have these little vignette experiences of your emotional blockages, your emotional traumas, unprocessed things that you haven't clearly cleared out yet. And so that was part of it. But there was a moment where I took off the blindfold because I needed to go to the bathroom. And the visual distortion was serious. I just put my blindfold back on and said, somebody help me to the bathroom because I'm not walking. I'm not looking at the world looking like this. But I did some research later in an encyclopedia of entheogens, and it talked about the visual distortions with Amanita muscaria, and they were too similar. While it did have the feeling of a tryptamine, and there are many tryptamines that I've known and loved in my day, but it felt like a tryptamine, but it also had more of the qualities of what Amanita muscaria is spoken about in terms of the visual component.
Yeah.
When you actually look with your normal eyes at the normal world.
Oh, I really appreciate you sharing the story. I don't have personal experience with that one, but it's like such a famous, iconic mushroom with the red one with the little white dots. And so, Mike Crowley talks about that in his book, and it's been speculated in a lot of books that could have been Soma. So that's such an interesting story that this person, and he was from India, so who knows? But it's a big, mysterious world.
Some say it might be blue lotus, related to the blue lotus root.
Oh, yeah.
That does have psychedelic qualities, but no one's been ever able to duplicate it, at least in modern times, other than these people from India who knew how to make it.
Yeah, seems like it got lost along the way. But, and this experience helped you to stop being addicted, basically, to overcome your addiction issues?
Well, it helped me look at the reasons why I was in so much pain, and it opened the doorway for me to start looking at things from a present moment perspective, which allowed me to actually see the dysfunctional thinking and the delusional belief system that I was living with, which was quite a shock, really. At first to realize that, for me, I'm a scientist, so I studied to know how the world worked, because as a child I was deeply entrenched in religion. Bless you. And it didn't give me any answers. It gave me a lot of stuff to make me go, really? But this started to help me get answers. This started to help me see the ways in which my thinking was distorted by beliefs that had no basis in truth. From religion, from culture, from family of origin, the way we viewed the world, the way we thought the world viewed us. I mean, all of these beliefs that started to just explode. But with Soma, it started at first to take away the emotional wounds that I had been carrying from loss, from trauma, from abuse, from molestation.
Yeah.
It helped me actually face into the emotions that I wasn't able to process. One of the things that happens, and you know this well, from people that are abused in a home environment, they have no safe harbor to process it anywhere, because their home, which is supposed to be the safe harbor, is the unsafe harbor. And so it wasn't until I was in treatment and working with these plants and working with this Ayurvedist who actually understood that the trauma is stored in the body, and that once you process it and release the emotions, it changes the nature of how that experience affects your day-to-day life. Because it changes my worldview. It changed my view of myself. The belief that there was something wrong with me. I lived my entire life believing there was something wrong with me. And it wasn't until that started to shatter that I realized there was nothing wrong with me. It was my thinking. It was my thinking. Not just my thinking being dysfunctional, but the fact that as a highly educated guy, I believed every single thought I had. At face value, which, as you well know, is a dangerous road to traverse.
Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing about this. I think that's really well said. And so gaining more perspective on your the beliefs that the thoughts come out of, like the negative self-belief, like the sense there's something wrong with me, to be able to gain a foothold and be able to question that and not believe that. That's so powerful. I think it's amazing how plant spirit medicines, psychedelics, can be used in such a way for healing and almost anti-addiction substances. which is counterintuitive to some people, understandably so, because it's, the question, why would you give a drug addict more drugs? And then I had a great conversation on the podcast earlier with Craig Salerno, who's a therapist who works with ketamine, and he's helped treat a lot of people with addiction issues. And he said, well, we're already giving addicts drugs. If you go to the typical addiction treatment center, the list of pharmaceutical medicines that people are put on is, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, different medications. And so if you could give someone one experience that could help them gain the perspective, and you're talking about seeing the beliefs that are causing the suffering that is driving the addiction. It's this interlocking circle of trying to get more to the root. Like, why is there the impulse for the addictive behavior? Well, it's because you're suffering, right? So,
yeah, the truth of it is, we're suffering, and we find something that takes away the suffering for a moment,
right.
Whether it's a drink or a drug or sex or work, something that takes away that feeling that there's something wrong with me, even for a moment, is something I'm going to continue to pursue every time I feel like there's something wrong with me in that moment.
Right.
The challenge is, taking an addict to a plant medicine ceremony is not really a dangerous thing, because the thing about a plant medicine ceremony is, while there's a lot of beauty and light, and brightness and uplifting, it's also heavy and hard. It's not easy to look under the hood at our pain, at our suffering, at our shadows. It is the anti-addiction medicine. I've seen so many people with addiction issues who are still struggling in and out of control of their life, whether or not abstinence or harm reduction is the model they pursue, as they start to strip away these misguided beliefs, these ways in which they believe there's something wrong with them. And it comes from our core understanding of what a child is. We're born divine essence. We land in this world, and we're told that divinity exists outside of us, and we need an ideology to connect to it. That's number one.
Yeah.
And then number two, we're not seen and acknowledged for the being that we are, and instead we're given a role to fill. And so we create all these false selves in order to show up how we need to. We become a multifaceted actor, which is extremely destructive. Extremely destructive, because every way I can't show up authentically, the part of me that is authentic is sitting in here languishing in misery because I have to hide who I am. And so that's the root of our addiction. That's the root of our pain. That's the root of our suffering as humans.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I think that's so well said. I worked at an addiction center. I'm guessing it's similar to the one you were at. I don't know. It's like people would often go there for a month or so. That would be the typical stay. And I was there for a little over a year, trying to help. I taught mindfulness there, which was the highlight for me. But it would be heartbreaking to see people come and then come back. And to see how difficult it was, and how, a month of sobriety didn't necessarily work, and that it would cost so much money and so much time and effort to be there for a month. Like a typical month stay is something like $30,000. And that was on the low end of these kinds of places. So I really do believe we need new ways and methods and models to work with and understand this. Because it's not, for some people could go there and it was be life-changing. But for other people, it wasn't enough. It didn't quite hit home. So
I saw that a lot, Julian. I saw people who would go on the revolving belt of rehab, relapse, rehab, relapse. Right. My first two roommates died in my first year.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
So it was no joke to me. This stuff was lethal. Addiction is lethal. Whether it was laxatives or whether it was heroin, it didn't matter. It would eventually kill the sufferer. And so it made me very, very serious to stay connected. But it was also what opened the door for me to try plant medicine. Because I saw that the 12-step model wasn't sufficient to clear the addiction. Putting somebody into a religion is not going to make them sane. As a matter of fact, the two are kind of diametrically opposed. And one of the challenges that psychology has today is they can't really call it out as delusional belief system, because of the power of that organization.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I would say to that, it works for some people and not for other people. And for some people, it works for a certain period of time, and then they want to move on to something else. But interestingly, I mean, so the good things about AA is that it's free and it's all over the country and all that. But it's interesting that the founder, Dr. Bill, had a huge spiritual awakening with LSD and then wanted to bring it to the AA meetings, and then he was dissuaded from doing that. And it's kind of that story kind of got covered up and lost, and now it's coming out again more. So he, was someone who really wanted to help people, and he saw that could be a way to help people, and it helped him. So that's fascinating. Were you, just real quick, were you addicted to a particular substance, or was it more just like anything you could get your hands on kind of thing?
I liked amphetamines and alcohol, mainly because the alcohol would allow me to be numb, and the amphetamines would allow me to be functional.
Jeez.
Because I didn't like being drunk. I just liked being numb.
Wow. Yeah.
Like many of my fellow addicts. And I'm grateful to 12-Step. It saved my life.
Wow, yeah.
I have no illusions about that. It saved my life. Having people to connect with who were like-minded and similarly bent on self-destruction and trying to do something differently was extremely helpful. There is nothing like the therapeutic value of one addict helping another, assuming that addict is getting healthier.
Right.
And that was part of what I saw. As the problem is that there was a lot of really vocal, outspoken, feigningly spiritual people who were just predators in the rooms. And or just destructive influences, which, we all have to learn that, too, in life. Not everyone that you meet, just because they have a smile and a kind face, is actually intending to be kind.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would add to that, if you went to an AA meeting and someone's there and they're 15 years sober, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a healthy, happy, well-intentioned person, like what you just said. So we got to look deeper than just being technically sober. It's got to be something more than that.
Well, I think it was at my 10th or 15th anniversary that I took Ena to her first AA meeting, which opened her eyes to a few things that she hadn't seen before.
Interesting. So, we haven't heard as much from Ena. Do you want to share a little bit about your story and how you came to where you are today?
Well, actually, listening to Howard's story, his story when I first met him had a really tremendous impact on me as well. And I began to learn through his experience with recovery, my own ability to articulate my experience with addiction. My experience with addiction is not with any substance. And I didn't know that it was an addiction before I had met Howard. Not that he put that idea in my head. There's actually a book called When God Becomes a Drug that I read by a man who was or is a priest who utilized the 12-step and began to deconstruct how religion can become another addiction. And I was raised in a deeply religious home and spent a lot of time, all my time really, as a child going to Christian schools, churches, study groups, camps. I sang in choirs. I was around it. It was the community. It was my family. It was my friends. It was my network. And so when I left the church, I had moved to Hawaii and I had an awakening in Hawaii. And it was not one I was seeking. It was actually, perhaps I was seeking it on another level, but on the everyday level, I was not seeking to get away from the church or the beliefs. But there was a family who was living there in Hawaii, and the first night I arrived on the island, he asked me this question. He said, "Ena, what if it's all a lie?" And I looked at him, and I had these huge crocodile tears pour down my face, and I just awakened in that moment. I couldn't go back. They say once you go to the mountain, you can't not see the mountain anymore. You can't unsee it. And so I couldn't unask that question. The question had been posed. My heart responded, and it sent me on an odyssey I can say I'm still on 25 years later. And so it it put me on this path where I began to want to learn from earth-based traditions. You know, I had been raised in the sky traditions with the sky gods and the sky spirits, so to speak, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. I was raised with these masculine and energies that were unattainable. You couldn't reach them. I wanted the earth. So I ended up getting my master's in Indigenous science from Naropa University and studied with Indigenous elders from all over the world. We did all of our residencies, or most of them, in Hawaii. And so I got to work with, walk with, learn from, listen to these elders who were pointing to our bodies, pointing to the earth as our mother, pointing to listening in a different way than with our minds. We'd all been trained to listen to the dominant culture and conditioning of Western culture, basically. So it was a time of great deconstruction for me. Yeah. And it's a long story, which I won't get into, but when I eventually met Howard, and we met as artist producer in the studio and started creating this album of songs that I had written and getting to know one another. And he introduced me to basically the notion that the songs that I was writing were my healing, were this opportunity to express an invitation for others to hear perhaps their own story through the songs that I was writing. And eventually I also met the plants, and through plant medicine, I began to see how my mind was an addiction, how crazy that is, and how hard that was to address. But, you know, my addiction manifested itself in depression. I had depression and anxiety for a good 20 years. And I consider myself a happy person, one who enjoys life, who enjoys connecting with people. But this depression was almost like this huge noose around my neck, or this huge weight around my ankles that were pulling me back or inviting me to death. And I would look at that and ponder it, not necessarily suicidal, but I just did not want to be here. I didn't want to be on this planet. I was really miserable. I would look out at the world and see the suffering, and with my own included, and I couldn't imagine why we were here. And so when I met the plants, it wasn't as if they were the savior, but what the plants did is they pulled the curtains away from my own thinking. And here it was an addiction to my thoughts, in the sense that I was identified with my thoughts as who I am. And that was the only way that I could perceive the world, was through my stories, my patterns of trauma, my attachments to my thinking. And the plants pulled that away and said, here's another way of being. Here's another way of seeing. Here's another way of listening. That we all have. Yeah, we all have that within us. And so that really opened the door for me to connect to presence, source energy, vibration through sound, resonance that has no attachment to personality, that has no story connected to it, that has no gender, no country, no skin color. Now, not saying it was annihilating all of that. It was just showing me that we don't stop there. Yeah. That's an expression of nature, a beautiful, unique expression of nature that we all get to carry as our unique selves. But we don't stop there as our identity. There's an infinite amount more available to us. So the plants really acted as a portal, a doorway to point to deeper presence within. And, you know, you were asking earlier about how we created our ministry, and part of the creation of our ministry, part of the intention of the creation of our ministry was to offer a community of support for people to tap into, feel connected, feel seen, and safe to ask questions about their own personal struggles and their own personal inquiry about dogmas and doctrines and ideologies and institutions that they're questioning, so that they can have deeper understanding of their own inner peace. You can be from any religion, it doesn't matter. But I would say that our community probably isn't for those that are really attached to and connected to their religion as the way through. They're certainly welcome. But it's really for those who are asking questions and wanting support for the everyday integration of awakening right here and now.
Beautiful.
Of connecting to meaning and purpose in the moment.
Yeah.
And we need each other to do that, to support ourselves on that journey. It's not a solo lone wolf journey.
Yeah.
And I thought it was. Yeah, we need community.
I really appreciate you sharing all that, and the journey from more, I guess what I would call conservative Christianity, from the sound of it. And it's certainly a strong community, I imagine, but a closed one, right? That's like my way or the highway. And again, I really appreciate what you're saying about seeing your own thinking as the addiction, like as that we're addicted to our thinking, addicted to these identities. And it's not about like denying these different identities, but that we can access something much bigger than that transcends them. I think that's so true. And it's such an important message. And it's good for people to hear that and know that. And unfortunately, our our politics and our culture, it's become so, what's the word, tribalized and so combative and polarized. Yeah.
Polarized.
All these things have just become these battlegrounds rather than something we could celebrate. They've become things they use against each other constantly. And it's just, I'm tired of it. So.
Well, Julian, one of the things that was really difficult and painful for me when I did leave my community was feeling alone.
Yeah.
That was really hard because I did grow up in a very loving, I want to say, a loving family, a community that is still very intact. There's been relationships in those communities of over 60 years of friends and people, married couples and family members have grown, raised their kids, raised their grandkids. They're all growing up together still to this day. It was a very loving, safe, held community that was very painful for me to leave. It was hard. It wasn't that I wanted to leave that. I just needed to have more of an expansion of connectivity to life through various ways of seeing life and feeling and being and breathing life. And I, unfortunately, in a way, not verbally, but in a way was sort of kicked out of Milton's paradise, in that sense of it was, a paradise lost. But as I grew through that period of time, and it took me many years, almost 2 decades, to climb out of that disconnect and breaking out of, because they weren't like my way or the highway. They're like, why are you leaving? We love you, but it was also, but you have to believe this way to come back. And I knew the language to speak. I don't know if you've ever seen the Amish. There was a reality show about Amish kids leaving Amish, I think it was called. And I watched a few episodes of it, and my heart was just breaking for these kids because I really felt this connection and understanding of their story and of their dilemma of leaving and feeling this liberation and freedom, but longing to go back to their family members and the community in which they were living. It's not so cut and dry. Someone who's outside of it may see it and go, yeah, why would you ever want to be in that? But if you've been raised in it, that's all you've ever known. And then to step out of it, and then to see it through a different lens. There's so much unpacking and healing and also deconstructing to be done. And without a support network, it's really frightening and scary and overwhelming. And people want to go back because there's safety and reception there. So our ministry is about creating, we call it a ministry. It's actually, that's how we were able to receive the protection for the work that we do. But it's really a community. It's a community that welcomes people to remember who they are, to unpack what they've been told who they are, and to deconstruct beliefs that are no longer serving. Meaning, are they pointing us to the aliveness within? Are they pointing us to the presence within each moment? Can we let go of the past? Can we let go of projections of the future and really be here and be here together with one another? How do we do that? And can we do that together in community? And that's what we explore, and that's what we unpack and support within some courses that we teach, and also that are peer led, and meditation groups that we cultivate and nurture. So this is a deep passion for us because of our background of suffering and also what we've learned along the way. We're wanting to share it now and inspired to do that. And I think COVID had a huge impact on us in pushing us out of the underground work that we've been doing and sort of coming out of the closet, so to speak, or coming out into the lights. Truly, we haven't been on social media. We haven't been speaking about our work publicly. I don't want to say we've been in hiding, but we've just been very confidential and super protected and safe in the work that we do. And now it's time for us to come out and speak about it.
That's wonderful. So now you're really wanting to share it more broadly. And what I'm hearing is a real emphasis in your ministry and work of creating community. And that's so needed and so important. And to have a community that's not based on belief. You don't have to believe a certain thing. Because I totally agree. There's a lot of religious, spiritual communities that are very beautiful and loving and supportive. And when there's this emphasis on you have to believe 1, 2, 3, ABC, or you're going to hell for the rest of your life, or for eternity, or whatever it is. I mean, it's just... I remember... So I grew up in North Carolina in the Bible Belt in this conservative area, and my family was not religious at all, but I grew up in this milieu, and I remember being like 6 years old or so and having a sense that, at that time, like thinking like, I believe in God, and there's no way that I can believe in this idea of eternal hell, that if you don't believe the right thing, that you go there forever, and everyone who was born before Jesus was born has to go there too, and the whole thing just made no sense to me, and it was kind of horrible to think about. So, and I also saw my friends at school who would go to church and Sunday school and the community that they had, and feeling the lack of that a little bit, because we have a culture that's so individualized and so materialist, and so many people are feeling alone, and obviously COVID and the pandemic increased that a lot. And I just went through my own kind of forced 2-week quarantine after I tested positive, and it really, hit home for me on a deeper level, because I was forced to isolate physically, and I really felt it, on a deep level this time. And for it to happen for me after a whole year of avoiding getting sick, of trying to do everything right, it was super frustrating. And it's just, I think part of why it's hitting us so hard is because of these things in our culture where we're already feeling kind of isolated, and then this happens and it just accentuates it like a million times. So to create this, community that's again not based on belief or identity, I think that's really, really needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the invitation is to say, hey, all are welcome as long as you're willing to put down your attachments and open your heart and mind. You can maintain your beliefs in the community. We're not here to dismantle. We're just here to deconstruct and question and invite conversation, and also connection to essence, to great mystery, to source, to God, to whatever you want to call it. But it's really not any one of those things. These are all words that are pointing to truly that which cannot be named, because energy can't be named. And so we are all born of nature. When you look at nature and you see something growing, we've all decided to call it something so that we can talk about it. But that sequoia tree is going to be itself, whether we call it a sequoia tree or if we call it a pine tree. It's still going to be there, and it's going to be there long after we're gone, and it's not going to be attached to that name or its functionality as we've learned from it, because it's itself. And I think that we also have, as you mentioned, Julian, we've come to this place in life where there's so much polarization, this side or that side. The duality is so strongly revealed, isn't it? The right, the left, the good, the bad, the black, the white, the male, the female. It's so divided that it's causing a tremendous amount of suffering, and we're seeing that suffering on the stage of the theater of life in a way that perhaps we haven't seen quite like this, because COVID has invited us all to slow down a little bit more, to see a little bit more, and to listen a little bit more. And now we're listening to voices that haven't had a platform, or haven't had permission or space to speak. And there's a deep amount of suffering, a tremendous amount of suffering and dismissal and marginalization. And so our community, we're here to invite opportunity for healing, for listening, for return to presence, because this is what has transformed our lives. And this is what we want to share. It isn't the way. It isn't the only way. It's a way. And it's a way that we have found through plants, through sound, and through community that has transformed our lives. And we're passionate about sharing it because of what it's done for us. So, that invitation is there for those who want it.
So, I mean, like, part of what I'm thinking about and listening to you is through coming together and creating ceremony and having music and, maybe plant spirit medicine or not, but to be able to kind of facilitate an experience that goes beyond what you think and what you believe. Basically, that in itself can be so healing, because until you have that experience, you are kind of, generally speaking, stuck in your mind, right? It's like a prison.
Yes.
And the not well-decorated one often. At least mine wasn't the well-decorated prison. It was really scary and messy in there.
Yeah.
When I first got into 12-step, there's so much that I got from it that was beautiful. And one of them is, look, don't spend a lot of time alone in your mind. It's a very bad neighborhood. And the truth is, I now understand why. Because of all the ways in which I had to deny my authentic self in order to be what was expected of me in family and culture. And that false sense of self eventually became my operating system and view to the world. But it wasn't me. And every day that I lived with that, I was suffering more and more at denying the truth of who I am. And the fact is, the truth of who we are is so much more beautiful than we were ever led to know. Obviously, there are plenty of people on this world who were raised that way. They're just not the people we find in 12 steps and coming to our work. Those people are out there living their life, and they're happy, and it's fine. And also, there are those who are completely attached to their beliefs, and it's working for them, and they're fine. Right. And that's great, too. As long as they're not pulling out weapons to try and make anybody else believe that, it's good. Because ultimately, if it brings you joy, and it brings you peace, and it's not harming another human being, it's none of my business. I think one of the most astonishing things I found in the world of ceremony, not just plant medicine, but other practices of ceremony, whether it was Native American church, whether it was in Kundalini practice, is that I found so many people who did the same thing that I did, is they found their roots in 12-step and then found a practice that keeps them connected to their authentic self outside of that. Because, initially they tell you, 1 in 20 people get and stay sober in AA for extended period of time, 5 years, 10 years. Well, the truth is, I'm finding that a lot of people get and stay sober. They just don't stay in AA to do it. Yeah. Which is neither right or wrong. It's just whatever personally works for you. If that model doesn't work for you, find one that does. Because ultimately, being connected to my authentic self and living joyfully, as authentically as I can, is really why every other creature lives the way they live. I mean, that tree, the apple tree in our backyard is not concerned that the orange tree produces more oranges. It doesn't pine, and the pine tree doesn't pine away to be the oak, dropping all those mighty acorns, right? Only humans do that, and there's a reason why. It's because we are culturally conditioned.
Well, I think this is where Terence McKenna, I'm going to paraphrase a quote of his, but he says something along the lines of, we are lacking new ideas. When you work with plant medicine, he talks about going out and getting new ideas. Where do we get those new ideas? We get them by dropping the stagnant, dormant, institutionalized, and conditioned ideas that we have been taught that we've been taught that this is who we are and this is how things are done. And I, through plants, have learned according to whom? According to whom? You know, when the plants began to teach me and Howard how to sing, which is a crazy statement, I know. If you haven't done plant medicine, I certainly would think that was a crazy statement before I had done plant medicine. But they taught me how to sing, and they taught me how to be more present to what was happening, what is happening right now. That is a new idea. Because I'm not coming to the table saying, okay, this is how it's going to go. That's me projecting and then creating a false present moment reality because I'm in the future. If I'm opening to the moment, if I'm allowing myself to accept what is in this moment and go with a greater flow, that's a new idea that Terence McKenna is talking about. I'm opening to creativity in a way that has not been shown to me because I've been taught in this book, or I've been taught in this stagnant word, or I've been taught in this stagnant thought based on someone else's mind. Now, this isn't to say I can't learn a tremendous amount from people doing, especially research and in the worlds of science and creative arts, philosophy, psychology. Of course, there's so much to learn. This is not abolishing all of that, but it's just to keep not as much of a myopic focus, to have a softer focus, and invite also the invitation for there is this, and there is an invitation for there's a great mystery that we don't know. At the same time, we can include both, that we don't have to stop and say, you know, as I was raised, this is the way, the truth, and the life. Well, then there's no other way to explore. And that for me was not only limiting, but it also created a lot of suffering, ironically. So opening to, as Howard was mentioning, to, you know, you not banishing or abolishing some of these structures and tools that we've been given to use that are helpful. But as Howard has often said, don't drop anchor anywhere. Don't drop anchor anywhere. We are meant to be flowing and moving. Sometimes we stop. Yeah, but it's not to like stay. You know, we can stop for a while in a practice or a path and learn and glean all that we need from that and share with others what we've learned. But keep going in terms of keep flowing, not to gain more, but to be open to more aliveness.
Like opening to the mystery, opening to what we don't know.
Exactly. What we don't know, that we don't know.
Yeah. But you mentioned...
Which is the next level to it.
You mentioned several times this, like, authentic self. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? Like, how do you think of that?
Well, I'll start. Howard can share...
I'm going to take a pause for a second.
Okay.
I need to...
No, you're fine.
Okay. Sorry. I didn't get that done before.
Do you want me to wait for him to come back?
You don't have to if you don't want to.
No. Okay. Well, authentic self, for what I'm exploring, and again, this is words. So these are words pointing to concepts, and the concepts are pointing to a way of talking about it. My experience is the inauthentic self is the ego. And the ego is this combination of a bunch of different patterns put together from trauma response, and I live out my life through these different reactivities, through trauma response patterns, through mental patterns that I received from my family of origin, from my religion of origin, from my community of origin, institutions, etc. This isn't to blame. This is just how I was. This is how I was developed. And we all have this original separation when we're born into human being. We're born separated from source when we come into the world of form. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't the world of the formless within us. There is. But as we, come on in, Howie, as we're born, we're disconnected from only the world of the formless. And so we have that experience of separation. And that experience of separation is the human condition. This is how we experience life. And so if we're born in an environment where we're supported to remember the divine essence of who we are, it doesn't mean that we're going to walk around impervious to the human condition of suffering. But we maybe have more tools to face suffering than be attached to and identified with our suffering. Because most of us don't get those tools of support, we create these false selves. And then we begin to believe that these false selves are who we are. And then we have deep suffering because we're living in our trauma. We're living in our created patterns. We're living in our depression, addiction, attachments, etc. And so the authentic self is that which is energy in the moment. That which is who I am here without any of my stories attached to the future or dragged from the past. And that's really not an easy cement wall to crack through. And this is why the addiction is so strong and powerful, because this is who I am. I want to hold on to my trauma, because if I let go of my trauma, then I'm saying it didn't matter. Is a thought. Or I don't want to wake up because that may mean I have to leave my family or community, or I may have to step away from my play toys and playthings, as they say in recovery communities. I don't want to do that. I love these people, or I love taking these substances, or I want this, or I want that. And so then we stay in suffering. So our authentic self, it's not actually a self, it's our authentic being.
Yes.
It's our authentic energy, because our self is just another constructed idea. Ena, this body, this face, this hair, this gender, this race, is just a construct. It's just a meat suit, but it's a beautiful divine meat suit, but it's not the totality of who I am, you know? It's just this vehicle through which I'm moving in the world. And so when I invite my authentic being into this moment of Ena, of this conversation, say, and here we are having this discussion. I'm talking as Ena, but I'm also inviting my divine essence, meaning I'm recognizing that there's so much more to me than just what I see. And there's so much more to you, Julian, than just what I see. How could I begin to know who you are when you are a divine being that is of the universe and is of infinite energy and creativity? How could I possibly begin to know the totality of who you are? And if you were angry with me in this moment, would I say, oh, he's an angry person? No. But if I do that, then I'm limiting you, and I'm only seeing you in one aspect of who you are and making that the totality of you. And that's my false self meeting with your false self, and we're having challenge. And we stay there because our egos like to stay there and be in challenge because we're attached to that. So when we start to deconstruct that and let it go and see each other for who we really are, first within here, and then I can see you, or I can see you or others, and support that within the other, I'm opening up to such a greater experience of being alive in the world, and also not limiting my exchange with others. I can learn from. You don't have to think the way I do, or believe or express exactly as I do. In fact, how boring of a world that would be if we all did that. You know, look at the animals. Look how many butterflies there are. There isn't just one butterfly. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of types of butterflies. How magnificent that is. You know, how incredible how many sharks there are, species. Hundreds and hundreds of them. Unfortunately, many of them are becoming extinct. But, you know, there's so many different kinds of whales or dolphins, and we just see one and we think that's the only one, and it's got to be like this. So this is part of awakening that really excites me, to open up and expand and invite and have this invitation of others to explore along with me, and me along with them, to unpack and question and invite the great mystery in all that we do, because it is so much more. Life is so much more than this 3D kind of experience. And yet we become so attached to it and then want more and accumulate more. And this is why our earth is suffering. The people on the planet are suffering. Animals are suffering, because we're not taking care of each other. We're not taking care of ourselves.
Oh, yeah, that's well said. It makes me think of the Buddhist teachings around emptiness and no self, like to access this bigger space that's not identified with anything within the space. Yeah.
I mean, there is this, it's not the annihilation of this body or self in the sense of, I'm not saying that I don't exist, right? It's that it's included within the great mystery, as the yin yang symbol shows. There is black within white and white within black. There is form within the formlessness, and there's formlessness within the form. That is, an old Zen Buddhist tenet is form and formlessness and formlessness within form. Within the great mystery of energy, there is form. How could there not be? It wouldn't have come from it if it hadn't have been there. And just as within me, there is the formlessness, the great mystery, its presence, the spirit of all of life. That is who I am within this form. And this form is just a piece. So I believe, and I've come to see, I have forgotten this. And the plants and my healing process and journey of working with so many different teachers and healers along the way have continued to point me back to this inclusion of all of life, And if I'm not including all of life, it doesn't mean I have to understand it all or like it all or connect with it all, but just to include it all. It's all welcome.
Beautiful.
How can it not be? How could it not be welcome? It's all here.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a place for everyone and everything.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, I've got another question for you both that is, let me see if I can put into words. If someone came to you for, to work with you and wanting support, and they had some sense of their authentic self, and they'd had different experiences like this, and a sense of being connected and everything, but their question was, how do I know what to do? Like, they're looking for help making decisions. Like, the world is so big, there's so many options, we have so much choice. Like, how do we take this authentic self and like bring it into the world, our relationships and the choices we're making? And how would you help someone with that?
I think the first step would be to question the motivation. To question the motivation. Why do I want to figure out what it is I'm going to do? Am I doing this to make myself money? Am I doing this to survive in the world? Am I doing this to be famous? Or am I doing this because I don't know what else to do? Or am I doing this because this is how I am abundantly overflowing with giving? And that's what I want to offer the world. Because ultimately, the great mystery is an abundant wellspring of giving. Completely overflowing. And so when a human being is connected to their authentic nature, to their divinity, they are an abundant wellspring of whatever it is they're here. Whether it's someone who's a magnificent accountant or a car mechanic or a coach or somebody who understands diesel engines or quantum mechanics. Like Stephen Hawking. What kept this man with ALS who nobody has survived past their 20s? Yeah. This man died of old age with ALS, which was unheard of before him.
And he also said that he wouldn't have had it any other way.
That's incredible. Yeah.
He spent all of the time doing what he loved, which is being in the realm of the theoretical, the metaphysical aspects of how the world operates. Ultimately, you look at Einstein, Sagan, I don't know if I heard anything from Hawking about it, but they were both fundamentally very, not religious, but they had a firm belief in a creator. And their job was to figure out how the creator was doing it, as mine was. When I left my religion as a young man, I sought science to answer those questions. So when someone comes to circle back to your question about wanting to know what it is to do, the question is first is why?
Yeah.
What's your motivation?
I like that.
And if that's what you love, then why the hell aren't you doing it? What is standing in the way? We already know. It's our conditioned, unexamined mind and the beliefs that come with it. So then we start to deconstruct that. Because the do will come. The do comes from the being. Like, we love to make music. It doesn't come from sitting down and getting at it. It actually comes from a very different place, which is sitting down and allowing it to flow through.
Yeah. I think that's helpful. I think it's just, you know, my work as a therapist and as a coach, and I did more life coaching in the past, so like, it can be, you know, people can get so stuck here, and I've certainly been stuck there in the past too. And I think our culture is addicted to doing and image and overly active, and so to find this balance you're talking about and come from, look at where you're coming from and why you're coming from there, why you're doing the things you're doing. Yeah, and to not get stuck there, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of, absolutely. And there's a lot of comparison. Right. You know, I think that's part of getting stuck. When we are in comparison, we are in the false self. That's just a good little flag. If I'm comparing myself to somebody, ding, my ego's active. Okay, hi ego. Welcome to the table. You can have a seat, but you can't be running the show.
You don't get the microphone all day.
Yeah, and you know, and our world right now, or a lot of, anyway, the social world of social media and et cetera, is based on a lot of comparison. Yeah. Wow, look at what they're doing, or where they're going, or what they look like, or their body shape, or their money status, or their political status, or whatever it is. And it's a machinery. So, you know, to look at it and go, okay, this is here, and how do I want to be in it? You know, can I be my authentic self and be in it? Without getting caught up in my mind's desire to compare all the time. That's a real one. I don't think any of us are impervious to that, you know, but recognizing that it's there, and then we see it and we say, okay, there it is. And I don't need to play in that sandbox. I can play in a different one. Yeah. And if I'm getting sucked into it, maybe I need to pull back for a while, or maybe someone else can do that work for me, you know, so I don't get caught up in it so much. If I'm sensitive to it, what a beautiful thing that you're sensitive to it. It's okay. Use that sensitivity in a way that you can connect with people that touches your heart or my heart. And so it's being honest, I think, with this isn't a one size fits all world. And often I have found in the cultures in which I was raised, it's a one size fits all. And it's just not.
Absolutely.
It's just not for so many.
Yeah. Well, okay. So one last question for you guys, and I really appreciate your time. How do you, like, in terms of creating this ministry and the work you're doing, how do you think about your own teachers and the question of like lineage and where you're coming from with that? Do you feel like we're needing to create new ways in our world today, you know, like versus like some people who are very concerned with like carrying on these traditions from the past, like however you want to speak to that?
I think that is a great question, Julian. I think that's a constant question that I think every generation is asking, how to honor those who have walked before us, and also keep in mind those who are going to be walking long after will be gone. You know, one of the things I know for me, and in working with many Indigenous elders and teachers along the way, is that these traditions originally were, and some still are, oral tradition. A lot of the elders that I was working with, they wanted to teach us how to learn in a new way. Meaning a way that was not stuck on just a book or a word, that they were teaching us how to listen and learn in a different, from a different perspective within. And so I think when we can learn from that perspective, including book learning and teaching, but when we can also include, kind of hearkening back to what I said earlier about the creative flow of divinity, you know, where we're opening ourselves to what is alive in the now. It's honoring that which came before, but it's also alive with what's needed now. And so we can honor the earth and be present to what is needed here and now, and not be stuck in the past of what was written 2, 5, 10,000 years ago doesn't mean there isn't wisdom there for us. It doesn't mean that there is a vast amount of knowledge for us to glean from. But to remember that we are here in this moment, and this moment includes all moments, not to get too esoteric, but just to acknowledge that where we are right now, we can open to what is needed. And that's honoring both the past and as well as, not to say the future, because the future doesn't necessarily exist in the sense of I'm not doing this for future generations. I'm doing this for now. And if I can open to what is in the now, then I can be of service to those that are needing healing, including myself.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to that. Yeah,
I come from a lineage of people that carried an oral tradition. I'm a Hebrew by birth. And, you know, one of the things that's beautiful about an oral tradition is that it evolves with time. It evolves with culture. It evolves with the change in community. It evolves with people's new awarenesses. You know, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, and you look at a lot of those stories that are told, they're meant to teach something. They're not meant to be taken literally as history. And I think one of the greatest disservices that happened to the world is when that book became a history book, a fact book, rather than a book of allegory and stories that were meant to be interpreted. And the interpretation was meant to change in every generation because people change. You know, in Hebrew, there are 3 different words that are spelled the same. And they all refer to something similar, which is Sefer, Sipur, and Saper. And one refers to a book, text, something that's written on a piece of paper. And they consider that to be dead. There's no life in it. It can't evolve. It can't change. But as that is passed down as something to learn from, not to study and memorize, but to say this story has meaning. And it's always had meaning. What meaning does it hold for you? What do you get from it today? You know, as opposed to what Rambam got from it 2,000 years ago, or Nachmanides 500 years ago, or Maimonides, or all these different rabbis along the way, who also interpreted for current belief and current understanding. So when we take these stories and we carry them forward and we teach them, they evolve. They evolve to apply. This is one of the reasons why the Hawaiians never wrote down Huna. Because in every generation, they wanted it to be a living testimony to how people can be with each other, as opposed to a dead order of what you're supposed to do in every generation, because that won't work. As Ena was saying, it just doesn't work. Most of these stories come with beliefs that are thousands of years old that we have deconstructed with science. We don't need to carry those forward. But we can still carry forward the idea of the great mystery. Now, as we dig deeper into things as science, we find that underneath it all, there's just energy. How magnificent. It points to the fact that the great mystery is consciousness. Well, how wonderful. So then the great mystery is actually in everything. Everything is constructed of this consciousness. And as, I'm sorry I don't remember his name, but he refers to, you know, what is the nature of the source is like a bowl full of oil, like sesame oil, where each living thing coming out of it is a wick dipped into that oil. And when you can light that wick and it burns some of that oil, each wick is going to have its unique characteristic glow and appearance. And yet they're all sourced from the same mystery, the same source. So we can look at all of life as different wicks coming from that same source, each giving a small ray of the luminance that is that great mystery. To me, it becomes much more fascinating to recognize that the things that we see and call the laws of physics or the laws of nature are actually how simply this great mystery has caused all of this to be. To really think that there's a proton, electron, and a neutron, and that makes up everything. And underneath that, there's a handful of subatomic particles, and yet there's an order to the chaos that makes all of this possible in its totality. What a great mystery that is. And being able to pass that forward as the question rather than an answer You know, in the ancient texts, they talk about God being represented as Belima, which is without what? Without substance. And yet we're here in physical form as a small piece of that. But in fact, there's no way to totally identify and codify and quantify that great mystery because we can't even comprehend the totality of it. We can't even comprehend the totality of the universe we're in, even with the Hubble. It's 100 trillion light years or 100 billion light years away. That's great. I could probably figure 100 miles, maybe 1,000 miles. But when you get into the hundreds of thousands or the billions, you're way out of my league.
Yeah. I really appreciate your words there and how these things are meant to evolve and change and not be static and nailed down. You know, it's such a good way to look at it. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been really great. Do you have any last words for us?
Well, first is thank you so much, Julian, for the time and for the opportunity to speak with you. It's really beautiful. And while I'm sorry that we had to do it again because you had COVID, I'm glad we did because it's a beautiful conversation today.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Julian, for having us, and glad to hear that and see that you're feeling better. And it's just been a wonderful opportunity to share our message and to communicate that with you and your listeners. And we're just so passionate about it and also really grateful to have the opportunity to share it today. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you so much.